If you're tired of these promos, supporters get the podcast early and ad-free. Just go to donate.bogosity.tv for the links to sign up. Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the week of August 15, 2021, the podcast that invented the flying submarine. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's immunize the news of the bogus. Heather Weicker is a St. Paul police officer who did a lot of work investigating a sex trafficking ring run by Somali refugees. She gathered evidence, cultivated witnesses, filed police reports, and gave sworn testimony. But all that was actually fairly easy for her since she fabricated that very trafficking ring. The cases resulted in 30 indictments, 9 trials, and no convictions. Now here's the really bad part. 16-year-old Somali refugee Hamdi Mohammed and her friends were attacked at knife point by Muna Abdul Qadir. Mohammed called the police and was unlucky enough to have Weicker respond. She arrested Mohammed, not Abdul Qadir. Why? Because Abdul Qadir was one of her witnesses. Mohammed spent 2 years in jail on charges of tampering with a federal witness before the charges were finally dismissed. And she can't get any compensation at all because the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals determined that Weicker has absolute immunity. This despite their acknowledgement that Weicker fabricated evidence, altered police reports, falsified information, and committed perjury. If Weicker had been acting as a state or local cop, she would have had qualified immunity, which we've covered. Mohammed would at least have been able to argue that immunity should apply, even though the standards are onerous. But she met that burden. The U.S. District Court for Minnesota ruled Weicker made such a mockery of the Constitution that there was no way qualified immunity would apply. But on appeal, the 8th Circuit said that since at the time Weicker was acting as a federal officer, she had absolute immunity. So our only hope now is the Supreme Court. The Bivens case in 1971 said that a victim could sue a cop in front of a jury after the cop raided his apartment without a warrant and later strip searched him. Unfortunately, since that time, the Supreme Court has walked it back a bit. In the 2017 case Ziegler v. Abbasi, they ruled that courts should consider special factors counseling hesitation before allowing a case to go before a jury. And really, that means whatever a cop can cook up and get a judge to go along with. That's what Mohammed's attorney, Anya Bidwell of the Institute for Justice, wants to change. Quote, Bivens is actually a great decision. It does provide a cause of action for a violation of Fourth Amendment rights. We want Bivens to be interpreted robustly and allow individuals to seek damages for violations of constitutional rights. Right now, if you live in the heartland of America, from Minnesota to Louisiana to Texas to North Dakota, anyone who carries a federal badge can violate your constitutional rights with absolute impunity. There is a federal statute that allows state and local officers to be held accountable when they violate someone's constitutional rights. And the courts have leaned on the fact that there is no analogous law doing the same for federal officers, thereby allowing them to escape accountability. But this groundless legal theory ignores the first 200 years of this nation's history and the limits on federal officials imposed by the Constitution itself. Hopefully SCOTUS will take the case and rule the right way. Where there's a right, there must be a remedy. Meanwhile, Weicker is still employed by the St. Paul Police Department. Unbelievable. If you're looking for a way to support this channel, but you don't have any spare cash and you can't stand ads, you can do so by generating your own cryptocurrency. Use the links at the bottom of the description to follow the link to Odyssey.com to listen to the podcast and see all of my YouTube videos as well. Just watching videos will produce cryptocurrency for the creator and yourself. And since Odyssey is always monetized and never censored, you'll have no problem seeing all the videos from your favorite creators. You can also use the library credits you create at Odyssey to tip creators and even purchase paid content. Earn library credits through various rewards, including daily view rewards and the number of shares and invites. And you can interact with creators in all sorts of ways, including like and dislike, comment, boost a post by supporting it, repost it, and share to other sites, all while earning crypto for the creator. Easily monetize yourself and your favorite creators using cryptocurrency without advertising. Use the link below to visit this channel on Odyssey.com and see many of your other favorites there as well. So we've done several stories about politicians wanting tech companies to break strong encryption to put in backdoors. Apple just decided to start doing that. In the name of scanning for CSAM material, they will be scanning all iCloud photos and iMessage images for illicit material. And the only way they can do that is with an encryption backdoor. As the EFF put it, quote, "Child exploitation is a serious problem, and Apple isn't the first tech company to bend its privacy protective stance in an attempt to combat it. But that choice will come at a high price for overall user privacy. Apple can explain at length how its technical implementation will preserve privacy and security in its proposed backdoor, but at the end of the day, even a thoroughly documented, carefully thought out, and narrowly scoped backdoor is still a backdoor." They're trying to say that it's still end-to-end encrypted because the scanning is done client-side. On their website, they posted, quote, "This doesn't change the privacy assurances of messages, and Apple never gains access to communications as a result of this feature. Any user of messages, including those with communication safety enabled, retains control over what is sent and to whom. None of the communications, image evaluation, interventions, or notifications are available to Apple." But as security expert Bruce Schneier said on his blog, quote, "Notice Apple changing the definition of end-to-end encryption. No longer is the message a private communication between sender and receiver. A third party is alerted if the message meets a certain criteria. This is a security disaster." Security expert Matthew Green tweeted, "Yesterday, we were gradually headed towards a future where less and less of our information had to be under the control and review of anyone but ourselves. For the first time since the 1990s, we were taking our privacy back. Today, we're on a different path." Edward Snowden tweeted, "No matter how well-intentioned, Apple is rolling out mass surveillance to the entire world with this. Make no mistake, if they can scan for kiddie porn today, they can scan for anything tomorrow. They turned $1 trillion of devices into iNarcs without asking." There are a lot of other great links in Schneier's blog post. Understand, it is impossible to build a system that can do this for CSAM images while stopping its use for other reasons. It's not a slippery slope, it's an open invitation. It can apply to anything some government somewhere wants to call hate speech or misinformation or whatever. This isn't fear-mongering. We've covered cases where it's actually happened. Way back in 1998, Tim May warned us about the 4 horsemen of the information apocalypse: terrorists, pedophiles, drug dealers, and money launderers. Always be suspicious whenever someone says we should tolerate X or Y or Z because of those. If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv. We've seen really stupid things done in the name of anti-piracy, and they just keep getting dumber. Anti-piracy firm Vindex sent a DMCA request to Google telling them to take down a link pointing to 127.0.0.1. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's called the loopback address. It means that device. Whatever device you're on, a computer, a phone, a router, whatever, that device is 127.0.0.1. So let's say you're running a background service on your computer. It might have a web interface. To access it, you'll use the loopback address with a particular port. So you might go into a web browser and visit 127.0.0.1:8383 or something like that. It's fully secure, even from spyware running on your own computer, and no one else on the internet or even your local network can get to it, because when they type that in, it goes to their computer, not yours. In this case, Vendex, acting on behalf of TV channel TRK Ukraine, asked Google to remove content hosted on http://127.0.0.1:6878/ace/manifest.m3u. M3u is a playlist format. You give it a bunch of MP3s or other media files, and it'll tell your player to play them all in order. The word ACE probably means that this computer is using AceStream, a means of streaming video using the BitTorrent protocol. The link appeared in the HTML code of a page on tvisor.org. It's apparently due to a misconfiguration, as it can't be accessed by the visitor, who would be accessing their own computer if they tried following that link. At any rate, nothing on 127.0.0.1 is publicly accessible through Google and cannot be removed or blocked by them. As for what infringing content this supposedly links to, that's where it gets silly. Under the DMCA and comparable international copyright law, whoever requests a link be taken down swears under penalty of perjury that they verified the link as infringing. So either they committed perjury by not verifying the link, or they verified that they have pirated content on their own machine. Because that's the only way they could have found infringing content on 127.0.0.1. So basically, they asked Google to remove a file on their own servers that doesn't exist. And a lot of the files, even ones on actual public servers, were in this M3U format, which means they're playlists. A playlist is just a text file full of links. It does not contain any infringing content. It just links to other content. So, they want Google to take down links that link to infringing content. And I mean, one of them was http://185.231.160.42/6/2/index.m3u. In what way is there any indication of any infringing content there? The fact is, most of the links it sends to Google aren't indexed by the search engine. And of all the links they sent, only about 10% were removed. It's long past time these copyright cartels were held accountable for perjury and illegal takedown requests. Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-age children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins. And now it's time to thermalize this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this week, it goes to St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner, who, as we've covered in the past, is the prosecutor who fraudulently tried to engage in a political prosecution against Mark and Patricia McCloskey. But this story isn't about the McCloskeys. It's about the incompetence of her and her office while they were focused on the McCloskeys, which resulted in accused murderers being set free. Circuit Judge Jason Sennheiser dismissed charges of first-degree murder, armed criminal action, and unlawful gun possession against Brandon Campbell when prosecutors from Gardner's office failed to show up in court for the third time. Sennheiser said that the circuit attorney's office abandoned its duty when it failed to show up for scheduled hearings in May, June, and July. Quote, "The court does not take this action without significant consideration for the implications it may have for public safety. Although presumed innocent, Campbell has been charged with the most serious of crimes. While the court has a role to play in protecting public safety, that role must be balanced with adherence to the law and the protection of the rights of the defendant. The circuit attorney's office is ultimately the party responsible for protecting public safety by charging and then prosecuting those it believes commit crimes. In a case like this, where the circuit attorney's office has essentially abandoned its duty to prosecute those it charges with crimes, the court must impartially enforce the law, and any resultant threat to public safety is the responsibility of the circuit attorney's office." So there. Don't go blaming the judge or anyone else, Gardner. It's your fault. It was an assistant prosecutor who was assigned the case on May 17, even though she had gone on maternity leave on May 10. And that was just one of 3 murderers released in St. Louis because of Gardner's incompetence. Chief Public Defender for St. Louis, Matthew Mahaffey, said that the mishandling of this case, quote, "encapsulates a lot of the discovery issues we're seeing and the challenges we're seeing in getting cases to proceed with the full amount of information that our clients are deserving of. We're not getting what we need from the circuit attorney's office." Gardner then directly lied to the press and said, quote, "Be assured that as the circuit attorney of the city of St. Louis, I am accountable to the public for the actions of the office and remain committed as ever to upholding the highest possible standards and practices of accountability at all levels of this office, particularly the public safety of the residents of the city of St. Louis. As a result, the individual in this case is in custody." No, he isn't, liar. Campbell is still at large. But one wonders just what the hell is going on over at her office. Before Gardner took office, the percentage of unprosecuted cases was 13.5%, starting in 2008. The lowest being 9.8% in 2013, and the highest was 15.5% in 2015. Then, after Gardner took over, those figures jumped to 22.6% in 2018, 31.5% in 2019, and 35.8% in 2020. Her average of unprosecuted cases more than doubled. Not only that, but she's filing fewer cases overall to begin with. Pretty pathetic for someone who had her office manipulate a handgun taken into evidence, making it able to fire so she could file fraudulent charges. But it seems to me that you probably need your right to keep and bear arms in St. Louis more than anywhere else in the country. So all of that makes Kim Gardner this week's biggest Bogon emitter. I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.tv anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.tv. And now let's proletarianize this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And this week it goes to the Wisconsin Black Student Union, who decided to strike a blow for justice in response to the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. What did they do? Did they work to end qualified immunity and civil asset forfeiture? Did they fight for body cameras and an end to police unions? Did they work to end the war on drugs and other blatantly racist policies? No. They moved a rock. Chamberlain Rock is a 12-foot-long boulder weighing some 70 tons, which was named after Thomas Crowder Chamberlain, who was president of the University of Wisconsin-Madison from 1887 to 1892. So, was he a terrible guy? Some kind of awful racist? Well, I don't know, I've never heard of him, but they're not alleging that. No, they concluded that the rock was racist because a journalist used the N-word to describe it in an article in the Wisconsin State Journal in 1925. The term was apparently used in the 1920s to refer to any large dark rock, but this is the only case that university historians have found of it being used to refer to this rock. So now it's been moved elsewhere, to university-owned land near Lake Kagansa. Apparently it's no longer referred to as Chamberlain Rock, and instead Chamberlain will get a plaque at the place where the rock once was. What this was supposed to actually achieve is anybody's guess. The rock was a glacial deposit from the Precambrian. It was deposited right there in Madison for some 2 billion years. It predates animals with skeletons. And now, some snowflakes thought it was racist and whined enough to have it removed. Because one idiot journalist referred to it using a racial slur 96 years ago. Apparently this was a compromise. What they'd actually wanted was the removal of a statue of Abraham Lincoln on the grounds that he owned slaves. Abraham Lincoln never owned any slaves. Juliana Bennett, a senior and campus representative on the Madison City Council, said removing the rock signaled a small step toward a more inclusive school. Quote, "This moment is about the students, past and present, that relentlessly advocated for the removal of this racist monument. Now is a moment for all us BIPOC students to breathe a sigh of relief, to be proud of our endurance, and to begin healing." Are we absolutely sure that Bennett isn't trolling? So all of that makes the Wisconsin Black Student Union this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this Don't Look at Me, I'm Irrelevant edition of the Bogosity podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at Patreon or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Newton Lee. "It is high time we treated drug abuse and terrorism as diseases instead of wars, curing the patients rather than killing them." The Bogosity podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Bogosity. We live in a world where light bulbs connect to the internet, and recent attacks on them prove that your online security is under threat like never before. Not only your websites, but the internet-enabled devices you buy. And the biggest problem is weak passwords. That's why you need LastPass. LastPass allows you to randomly generate strong, unique passwords on the web and on your internet-enabled devices, all protected by one master password. LastPass sets up in minutes and gives you secure automatic logins throughout the web, synchronizing across all your browsers, all your computers, and even your mobile devices, at home, at work, or on the road. It even securely stores sensitive form data, including credit card numbers, backup sensitive documents, software licenses, Wi-Fi logins, and more. And with LastPass Premium, you can get these benefits on other applications, manage passwords for your entire family, and also get priority customer support. Sign up at password.bogosity.tv for a free month of LastPass Premium. Log in securely everywhere using the last password you'll ever have to remember. Go to password.bogosity.tv and get LastPass now.